Hi everyone, this is Bathymetrics, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a closer look at automation and sidechaining in Bitwig. This is kind of a follow-up to the first video in this series, number 1, where I did a detailed comparison of Bitwig 2.4 against Ableton Live 10. I received a few critical comments that seemed to think I was treating Live 10 unfairly or misrepresenting it. So let's talk really quickly about that and where that feedback was coming from, and then I just want to address that a little bit in this closer look. So this stemmed from a section in my Bitwig Handbook. You'll find a link to this in the comments for the video, by the way, just like all the videos in this series. But I have a section that I kicked off my very first video with that talked about what I felt were the top 12 pros versus cons of Bitwig versus Ableton. And I think that the few critical comments I've gotten are based on the fact that people were saying, well, wait a minute, Ableton can, in fact, do some of these things you kind of implied it couldn't do in this list of 12 things. But I think that they misunderstood that the point of this video, and really the point of every video in this series, is I'm doing these videos for experienced Ableton producers, and I'm trying to explain what you'll gain and what you'll lose if you consider migrating to Bitwig instead. So a lot of these pros and cons are coming from a quality of life and workflow speed access, and I've really tried to make that clear in all of my videos when I talk about what I think is a really strong feature of Bitwig. I'm saying it's just faster, it's better, it's faster, it's better. It's not any one huge killer difference. It's all the little differences, the little quality of life improvements that add up over time to be like really impressive overall better workflow speed and better quality of life and just an easier way of doing lots of things. So the specific comments I got about automation and sidechaining kind of fall into this category where a user said, well, wait a minute, Ableton can do it. And my response in a nutshell is yes, Ableton can do it, but Bitwig does it a lot better in ways that add up to much faster, simpler workflow. So let's talk about this in particular. The first comment I got was about sidechaining. And the things I could say about that. But the basic idea was that no. Sidechaining is every bit as simple and easy and straightforward in Ableton as it is in Bitwig. So I disagree with that from a quality of life and speed aspect. And let me show you why I disagree with that. Over here in Live, I have a real project from 5 months ago or so, and a variety of tracks. Down in this new track I added just for this demo, I've thrown in a bunch of different devices that all have sidechain inputs, and these are third-party VSTs, not native Ableton devices. If I pull Ableton compressor into a track, and we open it up and take a look at it, we can see that one of the things it has is a sidechain section where you can turn on the sidechain and you can say, okay, grab my audio for this sidechain from any given track on my entire project. So we're going to use this track called Riser. All right, so I've routed Riser to this track, and it says, okay, do you want it from the post fader, pre-fader, or rather post-effects chain, pre-effects chain, or after the fader? So let's just say I pick pre-effects as my signal. Oh, there we go. So this riser track currently is routed to the master. So I would expect that when I use this compressor like so, that I'm still going to get the riser, the original dry riser signal feeding through to my master and being played in my master, right? Or if this track were part of a group, I would expect it to go up to the group and then from the group down to the master. So if I play this project, and I don't think I have my sound settings for this set up so you'll hear anything, and that's okay. If I play this from this clip, you should still see the track meter showing some actual stuff coming out.
And repeat again and again.
Okay, sorry about that. I guess you might have heard that, or maybe that was just me. But you saw that right here, the track meter was showing some signal going, and that signal was in fact going down to the master. If I solo it, we can see that a little better. Okay. See, it's green here and it's green here in the master. So this routing is very friendly. When you're using Ableton devices, native Ableton devices, almost all of them are using a kind of pull routing, very similar to Bitwig. So the user that took exception to my comment about sidechaining being much better and easier in Bitwig was coming from this standpoint. I kind of suspect that person doesn't use many third-party VSTs or hasn't dealt with sidechaining into third-party VSTs, but that's where the pain in Ableton comes from. If you're using only native Ableton devices, almost all of them have a nice pull type of routing that doesn't disrupt your conventional routing of your channels themselves, right? Channel still goes where it's set to go to, and this Ableton device taps off the sidechain input into itself. So that's fine. The problem is, where it comes into play, is with third-party VSTs. So all of these have some kind of sidechain input. Let's see what this one looks like. All right, so here's the sidechain channel here. This VST, got a sidechain somewhere. Where are you hiding? Right here, sidechain. Do you want to use the internal sidechain, or do you want to listen to an external input in this button up here? And so on and so forth. So a lot of third-party VSTs are set up for sidechainings, but they have to be neutral for every DAW. So the way they work internally is they all just have some special input channels that are usually, and I stress the usually, they're usually labeled or marked in a way that the host DAW you load them up into can recognize which one of those things is the sidechain input. And so for all of these devices here, I've got some FabFilter, I have some things from Bose, I have a thing from Waves, this is from Waves, and then this is Neutron from Isotope. They all have sidechain inputs. And if I were to go to this riser track and I wanted to sidechain it, feed it as the sidechain input to any of these devices, I'm immediately faced with a dilemma. And the dilemma is none of these devices have any kind of pull feature that understands Ableton and can say, just give me a tap from this track called riser. They don't do that. They don't work that way. None of them do. No VST does. Instead, in your DAW, you have to somehow use the DAW's internal routing to send signal to a particular track and to a particular device on that track and to a particular input channel on that device. So the way it works in Ableton is I would have to go here and say, well, instead of sending signal to the master, I want to send signal down to track 31. And then you have to wait for it to look at track 31 and decide what all the possible routings are for it. Then you click this, and now you can pick specific sidechain inputs for all these devices. And I want to point out two things here. Pay really close attention if you've never run into this yourself yet, if you haven't gotten into this level of production yet. The first thing to notice is that some of these input channels in some of these plugs are clearly labeled sidechain, or SC for sidechain, or side for sidechain. So most of these make it pretty clear that you're picking the sidechain input for a specific VST. However, Isotope, they just say 3/4, right? This is very common for Isotope plugs. And the point is that every maker of a VST is going to be a little different in this regard. And in most cases, it's very obvious. You can be confident you're pushing into the sidechain input for that plug. But in other cases, it's a little less obvious. But since this is the only option it's giving me for this neutron to equalizer, I can be relatively confident that if I pick that channel, it's really the sidechain input channel. So it's not a big deal. It's not like they're offering me 2 or 3 confusing choices for one plugin. However, there are some plugins, and we could argue that they're poorly designed because of this or not. But a good example I have is, I ran into this so often with this plugin. I love it. I use it all the time. It's called Track Spacer. They have a newer version that fixes this problem to some degree, but for, a couple years, if you put Track Spacer and wanted to use it to do some dynamics control on a track, and you wanted to route sidechain input into it, this is what the old version looks like. And here's the button that enables the sidechain signal to push down other things or not. If I wanted to route signal into this, this is what I was faced with when I looked at it in Ableton. Well, I got Track Spacer 3, Track Spacer, and I have Track Spacer 4, Track Spacer. Well, which one of those is the sidechain input? Because they don't both work, only one of them works. And so every time I would use this, I would be like, okay, which one of those was the sidechain again? And I'd load one up and I'd try it and I go, no, that's not right. And I'd load another one up and I'd try and I go, okay, finally, that's the sidechain. And I've seen this behavior in some other plugs. And again, you can argue that it's a flaw or a defect, but it's a fact of life in DAWs. So, this is one type of confusion you can run into. Now, the other big problem with sidechaining in Ableton is you'll notice this track used to go straight to the master, or if it was in a group, it would have gone to its group parent and then from the group to the master. And you can have groups within groups, and you can do some very fancy kind of organizational routing just with grouping of things. But the minute I want to tap this off to some other track, a bus or a single track that for some reason I need that sidechain input, well, now I have to make a choice. It's not going to my master anymore. It's now only going to track 31, and it's specifically only going to the sidechain input of a specific plugin on track 31. And so there's no signal from this track ending up at my master anymore, right? That's a huge problem. Now, everyone who's used to Ableton doesn't even think about it anymore. They just know, well, there's 2 ways I can do sidechaining. I can always put sidechains on the group of a track, right? And then the signal from the track runs up to the group. But even then, and then, when you set this destination, like here, just let me do it. Let's group this track. All right, and let's take any one of these devices. Let's do the F6 stereo and put it on the group. Okay, so what people will commonly do is everything they know that they want to have sidechained, they'll group it, and then they'll do the sidechain ducking at the group level. So that allows me on the original track to say, okay, let's feed this to my group right here. And so the signal's being routed to the group. Oh, but wait, where's my, you see what's going on here? There's really no easy way to set up a specific tap, right? That doesn't work. So that's one thing you might be tempted to do if you're first struggling with sidechaining. So instead, what really happens, oh, I wish this project was set up this way, but I didn't need to do it for this project. Can I describe this easily? What they would really do is put, a whole bunch of tracks that they wanted to be sidechained by the drums, for example. Let's just say these 3 tracks. Come on, Ableton, catch up with me. Let's say that these 3 tracks, 4 tracks, let's set this back to group. Okay, so let's say I had 4 tracks here. and I wanted the kick drum to sidechain all of these at the same time. So I would group them, and I would probably name this group something like Sidechain or Sidechained or whatever makes sense to you. And then over here in the group track, over in the drum track, let's see, that's my drum bus. Did I do individual drum tracks on this? There we go. So like in this kick track, instead of pushing it up to the drum bus, I would say, well, I guess I need to make a copy of this, and I would literally duplicate the track and call this something like, ghost kick, which isn't a good term because ghost kick means something to real drummers, or I would name it something like SC trigger kick or something, descriptive. And then I would mute this track entirely. Now it's a duplicate of my original kick track. And I'm using this track to route down to my group. Where are you? Sidechain group, there you are. I would route this dummy track, this duplicate that's muted, down to my sidechain, and then I'd make sure it was going into, whatever sidechain devices were on that track. And so while this is possible, and we're all used to doing it in Ableton to use third-party VSTs for doing dynamics control or any type of application where sidechaining comes in handy. It's not always just used for compression or dynamics. You end up with these duplicate tracks all over your project. It's really messy. And even worse, if you try to set this up early in the project while you might still be making changes to your original kick track or snare track, right? Changing the patterns or whatever it may be, well, then you have to do those changes twice. Or you have to get rid of this track and, then you lose your routing, and then you have to dupe the new track once you're done with it, updating it and tweaking it a little bit. And it's just a lot of extra overhead. And again, everyone who uses Live for heads down production deals with sidechaining all the time, and we do this without really thinking about it too much. But if you stop and think about it, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes it slows you down. And when you make little tiny changes, like if I just drag 2 kicks off of the grid, I have to make sure I do that in the sidechain duplicate as well, or my sidechaining's off, right? Okay, so let's compare and contrast that with how it works in Bitwig. I've already set this up, so we won't have to take too much time, but the basic idea is, let's say I have a source track, and these are kick and snare sounds rather. So let's just solo this track real quick, just let you hear these. Okay, and I broke it up to spread it out just to demonstrate behavior. Okay, so it's just kick and snare. And this is in a group. So if you look at the routing for this track, it's going up to its group master. And then the group is sending it on to the master track. And so it's showing up down here at the master. So if we play this again, you can see it's triggering on the group, it's triggering on the master, and it's triggering on the track, the group, and the master down here, right? Now, let's say I have this special track somewhere, or group or whatever, and I want to have a dynamic EQ on it. And for whatever reason, I just did this quick and dirty, so none of this actually makes sense from a production standpoint. But I have neutron EQ, which has the notion of dynamic EQ points. So it's kind of like half EQ and half multiband compressor, kind of, sort of. And if you turn on the sidechain for a dynamic EQ point, you have a bunch of options for what you want to trigger that dynamic EQ as the sidechain trigger. And those can come from the other EQ points inside. That's what these internal things are. Or it can come from the full spectrum running through the EQ. That's what these internal things are. And then we have these external options, and the one we care about is external full. So this is configured for external full, which means it's going to listen for sidechain input coming into the VST from the DAW. Okay, So again, the way you do this in Bitwig is you just look for this little, any kind of device that has sidechain inputs. Any VST that has sidechain inputs will have this little sidechain button here. And if you click it, it says, well, where do you want it from? And we'll take it from not the group, but the actual track called source track, right? We could take it from the group if we wanted to, anywhere along the signal path, but we're just going to take it from the source track pre-fader. Okay, it's pre-fader and post-fader. So, and if there were processing devices on that track, I would be able to choose specific taps before and after every device in the chain. But we'll just take it from the pre-fader, and now we've set up this to be receiving external input. So that's going to be this external full spectrum, full chain input, and it's going to control this thing. So let's watch what happens every time it hits a green clip and plays some kicks and snares. Remember, this EQ is on this yellow looking track. So see how this dips down when it hits a kick and a snare? Okay, now it's quiet again. It's going to dip down again in a minute when it hits the green clip again. Okay, so that's great, right? So far, Ableton, the same thing, you just route it slightly different way. But wait a minute, take a closer look at what's going on up here. When I play this track, and we'll just play them both together. They don't match. I didn't tempo match them to the project. I literally just dragged a couple samples in here regardless of their original tempo or key. So don't worry if this sounds funky. But you're going to notice I didn't have to make a duplicate, a ghost track just for the sidechain trigger. I didn't have to make a duplicate of the original drum track because everything in Bitwig is a pull routing. It's a tap. It's a tap from the audio signal. So I didn't have to go through all those hoops of creating a dummy extra track and muting it. And then I have to worry about keeping my changes in lock sync between the original track and the ghost clip track that's triggering the sidechain. None of that. This still works. It still plays, goes up to its group, and from the group it goes to its master. See, these meters are still hitting, and it's still going down to the master. Okay, so that's one simple respect in which Bitwig is to me, this is a fairly significant quality of life improvement because if you're doing serious modern production, especially of heavy electronic genres like bass music genres, festival-oriented music, you're sidechaining all the time. You're trying to squeeze out every ounce of energy you can and be able to hit certain loudness targets. And sidechaining is very, very important. And you sidechain a lot of things to a lot of other things. And so having to create all those ghost tracks and do funky, weird routings in Ableton just to make the sidechaining work, it's possible, but it's slow. It's complex. There's more points of failure. Whereas in Bitwig, literally, if a given plugin, a VST, takes some kind of sidechain input, it's as simple as this drop down right here, and it just works, and you don't have to create extra ghost tracks or anything like that. Okay, so that's a speed improvement and a quality of life improvement. But it goes way deeper than this. Let's go on to the next fun part. Let's say, for the sake of example, that I had one specific processor on here. Let's grab, I don't know, some glitchy thing. Let's use one of the Ubics, because I like Ubic. So let's say for whatever reason, I said, I'm sound designing, I want to do something with this track, and what I really want to have happen is I want this wet, dry knob to bounce around and move whenever the kick and snare hit from up here, okay? And here, let's make this even more complex. Let's put this on a new track entirely. Just grab a whole different sample from somewhere. Use some big construction kit loop. How about drums. Oops, there we go. All right. Might be long enough. All right, well, let's try this one. That's fine. Okay, so I have a loop, and I want to sidechain it. And of course, it's not to tempo, but I'm just going to truncate it. And I have this, where's my Ubic? Let's drag the Ubic onto that. So I want this granular effects thing to do some funky kind of dry wet mix. Huh. Actually, this might not be a good one because it looks like it actually has a sidechain input. What is that sidechain going to? Weird. I'm not sure I've ever thought about trying to use a sidechain in this plugin. But we'll pretend it doesn't. Let's pretend this is one of those plugins. Well, let me do this right. Let me find a plugin that really doesn't have a native sidechain input. Just a sec. Let's just try, I don't know. Let's do a distortion and saturation. Let's do dirt. It's kind of a fun one. Okay, so here's dirt. It does not have a sidechain input. There's no little arrow down button here. But what I want to have happen is every time the kick and the snare hit, I want it to crank the drive. I want it to push this knob up and down. Kick hits, I want it to crank. Kick goes away, I want it to stop. Crank, stop, with the kick. Okay, so I want to sidechain a very specific knob inside of a VST to some signal from my DAW. Bitwig has this amazing modulator called audio sidechain. And the way that this works is, again, it's a pull routing, so it's tapping off the signal from anywhere in your project. So I'm going to pull off the source track here. So I go find group 1, I drill into the source track, and let's say I just want to take the post fader output from the source track. And now this is a sidechain input routing. I can set the attack and release characteristics or ballistics of the sidechain bouncing up and down. I even have filter values to like decide which frequency inside those kicks and snares is actually going to trigger the ballistics of the sidechain. This is very standard. If you're not familiar with sidechaining, a good example would be Pro C. So like in FabFilter Pro C, and in a lot of things, sometimes you don't want the whole wide spectrum to trigger the ducking. Instead, like if this were a kick drum, you might want to focus these spectral high and low pass filters to isolate a very certain section of the kick's total spectrum so that you get a very sharp and short click so that it triggers a fast sidechain, like a real brief, sharp sidechain. If instead you're not filtering out everything that's going on here, if you're taking everything from the spectrum, some kicks can be really mushy and have a long body element and then a long tail that rings out. And if you're picking up the whole spectrum like this, your sidechain ducking shape will be really long and dragged out, and so you'll cut too much out of the signal you're ducking with it. So this notion of having filters is, to me, very important for coming up with good sidechain signals to control the behavior of something. So this audio sidechain, I love that it has filters built into it, and it's got the typical attack and release ballistic characteristics, and then here's how you control how hard it sidechains, and whether it sidechains in a positive way or a negative way. Is with this little slider here. So then what you do is, you select the knob you want to manipulate with the sidechain, and that pops it to the top of, where's dirt? Right here. This is dirt. It pops it to the top. If I pick a different one like tilt, see how tilt has popped to the top. So you don't have to worry about anything except clicking the knob you want to manipulate, and then you drag this sidechain controller over here and say, well, what do you want it to do? Let's kick it up to like, that far. And you turn this off. And so now every time the kick and snare hits, it's going to push this knob up, and you'll be able to see it moving upward here, and also maybe here. I can't remember if it manipulates the UI too. Yeah. Let me turn off some of these other noisy ones so we don't need them. See? And then when it hits again, you're going to see this go up, you're going to see this go up. And if I want it to go up harder or farther, I can simply select the individual modulator or the whole plugin, and I can get to these values here and crank them up more and, you know, do whatever. Now the signal isn't very strong where I filtered it. Let me do this a little more wide range. Whoops, let's go that way and this way. So now it's pushing up harder. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is this one beautiful modulator lets you sidechain literally any source to any knob inside of any third-party VST. Can you do this in Ableton? No, you cannot. You literally cannot. Let me demonstrate that. We'll just pick any one of these existing ones. Let's use Manic Compressor. Doesn't really matter what it is. And let's say I want this attack knob to bounce whenever a sidechain signal hits it. Okay, so how would I do that? Well, you certainly can't do it natively. It turns out that in Live 10, they finally introduced a Max for Live device that is a kind of sidechain instrument. It's called Envelope Follower. At least I think this came out in 10. Now, Envelope Follower, if I put it, let's put it on this riser track. Actually, let me think about that. Is that where I want it? No, because I can only map to the devices on the same track if I do that. Let's do it a different way. How the hell do I? Oh, right, I get it. I've been heads down in Bitwig for 5 months, so I'm starting to forget some things about Ableton. But let's go back to the pretend track where we're actually wanting to do some sidechaining, and we can delete all of these devices except Manic Compressor just to keep things a little more clear and obvious. All right, so the way this typically works is you put the Max for Live device like Envelope Follower, LFO, or whatever. Most of them have these mapping parameters on them. And I'm still going to have to push some sort of signal into this track in order for the Envelope Follower to affect another device in some way, right? That's the idea. Now, I'm not going to go through that routing because we're not even going to be able to get that far, and this is what I'm trying to demonstrate. In Bitwig, I would take something like this Manic Compressor plugin, and I would click its modulations tab, and I would add that audio sidechain modulator and then route it to any of the buttons in or sliders or anything inside of the VST, and then I'm done. That's what you just saw me do over in Bitwig. Now, I had someone tell me, oh, you can do the same thing with Envelope Follower in Live. And I'm like, no, you can't. And here's why. Because if I try to map the Envelope Follower to something inside of this VST, like the attack knob, well, wait, nothing's happening. It's not mapping. There's no mapping happening. There's no map. I cannot actually assign the Envelope Follower to any control inside of this VST. These Max for Live devices, like Envelope Follower and LFO and the various ones that have some sort of mapping function, they only work with native live devices. So go to anything like, I don't know, Echo. Sure, let's bring in Echo. So let's close good old Manic Compressor here. So let's say I wanted to sidechain for some reason the feedback knob. Boom, boom, boom. okay? And I wanted to use envelope follower to do that, okay? I could click map, drag on the feedback knob, and hey, look, it's mapped. And then I can set mapping values, like, what's the lowest range for it? What's the highest range for it? And then now all of a sudden, the envelope follower will control the feedback knob when it receives some sort of input signal. So I would still have to go to the exercise of duplicating a track so that I don't break the original routing for the original track. And I would still have to push this down to the track that has the envelope follower on it. And I would still have to then pick, I guess it's just going to, automatically hear whatever's routed to the track. There's no like direct input channel on the envelope follower itself, but then the envelope follower will be following the envelope, the amplitude of that sound as it's getting louder and quieter, and it's going to echo that movement onto the feedback knob. So two things I want to say here. I hope I'm not twisting any heads with complex stuff you're not familiar with, but the two things are an envelope follower is not the same as a typical ducking sidechain envelope. Yes, you can control the attack ballistics of the envelope follower, and you can control the release ballistics of the follower with these rise and fall knobs. These are basically attack and release. But you can't filter out a portion of the signal to grab the one spiky part of the spectrum or the looser part of the spectrum. You don't have any real like typical adjustment you would expect to find on a sidechain input. Having that filter is very important. So this really is just going to closely mimic, or maybe depending on how loose you set its attack and how long you set its release, instead of a sharp sine wave, for example, it might do a more mellow kind of sine wave because you've loosened up the attack and release ballistics. But it's not really a sidechain. It's kind of it's a type of sidechain, but it's not the spiky, immediate, very detailed and controllable signal that we typically think of as being useful for sidechaining. And even worse, this only works on native live devices. You cannot use something like this on a third-party VST, like I've demonstrated. So in this area, Bitwig completely blows Ableton out of the water, 100%, no comparison, no equal, not even in the same ballpark. This is why I said in my first video, #1 in the series, the sidechaining capabilities in Bitwig are just amazing, and you can quite literally sidechain anything to anything else, and it's dirt simple to set up in every kind of scenario you want. And it keeps your projects clean because you don't have to make all these stupid ghost tracks to get around routing issues. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about sidechaining. Let's move on to automation, because that's another fun one. For this, the main criticism I got here, and let's just collapse some stuff, make it a little less messy. The main criticism I got here was that I made the statement in my first video that this little all button was just the bee's knees and just made handling your automation so much easier. It made everything visible. You never had to think about it. And some people took exception to that because they said, well, here, let's do it on this track because I have a few plugins on it. So we're on this track. Got a couple different devices on here. And I can literally, like, let's open up the dirt again. Okay. Watch what happens right here when I move the drive knob. Okay. So far, this is just like Ableton. In Ableton, you can just grab a knob in the UI for a VST, and as you grab it and start wiggling it, it's going to move over here. Okay. That's how it works in live. So far, exactly the same. Then let's say you want to start automating some of these knobs. You can also, by the way, just click the knob down here, without actually changing its values. Although in some cases it will change the value if you're not careful. So it's usually easier to just, click one of these and make sure it's on the value you want. So let's say I want to automate this drive knob. Let's go into pen mode and start drawing some automation on that track. All right, so I've got the drive knob automated. Now, let's go automate a different knob. Let's automate the bias knob down here, okay? Automation disappeared when I clicked another knob. Ableton does exactly the same thing, right? So I'm going to draw some automation for the bias knob. Now I'm going to grab the tilt, and we'll draw some automation there. All right, so I've been doing this sound design. I'm just playing with things. I'm automating things. I'm not really paying attention to the hygiene of my project. And so I'm like, well, shit, what did I automate? What exactly on this track is automated? And so I could sit here and walk through every single, thing and see if I can find something that's got an automated value on it. Now, as it turns out, Bitwig tries to be a little helpful by putting the things you've automated right here at the top section. But the main thing I pointed out in the video, my first video, was that Bitwig has this magic button here called Show All Lanes. And if you click it, it just automatically finds everything that's been automated and displays it. So that 3 lanes have been automated. One of them is the currently focused lane on the track, and the other 2 it just found and pushed them out into their own separate pinned lanes. So I was like talking about, well, this is really great because I never have to remember what I've done, and I never have to manually pin an automation lane. Like if I click this plus knob, now this track, this automation lane is duplicated down here, and specifically it's now pinned. And if I click a different knob somewhere that doesn't have automation on it, and I close and expand these, it remembers the state of the pin things. But the point is I don't need to remember to pin it. And it can even get a little confusing if I go back and touch the knob that was originally automated, because now I have 2 automation lanes that look almost exact. Well, they are exactly the same. And I'm like, which is which? And this is what happens in live a lot, is you end up with this which is which thing, right? Because you'll have pinned it so you could find it, and then it'll be duplicated here every time you're working on it. And it's just, you have to remember to sort of visually ignore this top row. Well, with Bitwig, I don't have to worry about that so much. If I clear out, if I pick a different thing that hasn't been automated, right? And I just say, show me the automation. It's very clean. There's no other dotted lines cluttering this up or anything. I just know I have 3 automation lanes for this thing. I can always trust that I can get to them with this button. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. If I delete the automation lane, it should also be deleting the automation itself, right? I now only have 2 lanes that have automation on them. If I go back to this tilt knob and re-automate it, right? I have it back, and if I click this, it's always going to be there. Now let's look at this in live and see some behavior similar to this. If I go to live and I go to a track that I know already has some automation on it, what would that be? Did I get rid of it already? Well, let's just look at it all. This is the first thing I don't like about Ableton, is when I am in single track height to see a big project all together, and I click this, this is the show automation lanes, nothing happens. I have to be in double track height to see whether or not there's any automation on a track. If I decide to open up all the tracks at the same time, so now they're all in double height, and then I turn on the automation, now I get this view, and look at how cluttered, ridiculously cluttered this view is. This is just amazingly hard on the eyes. The fact that you have these dotted empty lines for a track that has no automation on it is annoying as hell. The fact that on a track that does have automation, like this Spice Clock track, whatever has focus has a line. Whatever actually has automation on it, like right over here, well, it has a line. They're almost as eye-grabbing, even though they try to make them look different with dashes and solids to show whether or not there's actually automation there or not. It's a mess. If you're scrolling up and down saying, okay, let me review all my automation because something funky is happening. Why is that happening? And you're scrolling up and down here and your eye has a hard time picking this stuff out. And you have to be in this double wide track mode. So the original track is taking up this much real estate. And so at any given time, I've got like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, basically 4 tracks worth of automation in view at a time, right? Maybe even less if I have some tracks with 2 automation lanes on it, like this one and this one. And now I'm only seeing 3 tracks worth of automation. By default, by contrast, over in Bitwig, if I were to just load up all kinds of automation on here, and then do another track and put some automation on that too. Sure, let's mute the mixer. Let's also, well, and let me show you another thing. You notice this one has the all button on, right? So if I were to go to this device and start automating some of these things like the pan knob, did you notice how it just automatically pushed the mixer automation lane down and pinned it for me automatically? Let's watch this. Let's automate the pan. Okay. And now I'm going to pick a different thing to automate, like, I don't know, this gain control. Watch what happens when I click the gain control. Boom. It automatically copied down and pinned. It's pinning as I go. I don't have to remember to manually pin anything. It's just automatically doing it as long as this button is on. So let's grab a different thing. Okay, let's automate that. Let's grab a different one. Threshold. Let's automate that. Okay, so now I've got, first of all, the track height, the double track height in Bitwig is a lot more condensed than Ableton. So I've got 2 tracks and a lot of automation visible here, but I'll go you one better. Let's close these automation lanes and let's go into single track height, which is this button right here, or I have a shortcut that'll do it. Actually, the shortcut always pops them open. So here everything is in single track height. If I have a really full project full of tracks and I want to see the automation, what pops open all my automation? I forget the shortcut for that because I don't do all of my tracks that often. Sorry, give me just a sec. Toggle. Show automation for all tracks. There we go. Shift A, that's what it is. I like that I can assign my own shortcuts. I just never use this one that much. So here, these started out as single height tracks. And if I do show me all the automation, 2 things about this. First of all, because the original track itself, this is the clip header. It's staying small and it's only showing me the automation lanes. So there's 4 automation lanes plus this skinny thing for the original track. Let me close all those up again and do double track height for you. And now let's do that again. So see, now it's double height, so I can see the waveform better. But just this small detail of being able to start with single track heights, and when I show all the automation, it doesn't take up any more real estate than it has to. I can still see where the clips are, but the focus is on the automation, not on the waveforms too, cluttering everything up and making it harder to see what's what, right? You can turn it on if you want to see those waveforms. You can turn it off if all you care about is kind of comparing where the automation's lining up. So this is a big difference, this behavior of single versus double tracks. This behavior of automatically pushing down whatever's the currently focused and active automation lane is different. So again, if I come to the device track and I pick some other thing. Again, one more time, I'm going to pick a new thing to automate, and as soon as I click it, you're going to watch this track just push right down and automatically be set up as a pinned lane. So I click this, boom, this is now pinned. So what this means in real world terms, let me show you how it works over in live instead. Here I have a couple automation lanes, and I'm going to remove this one lane because it's cluttering, or I don't know what to do with it or whatever. So I've clicked the minus button. It's not really gone. You only get rid of the automation if you do right click and do clear envelope, right? All I've done is I've unpinned the lane. Now, the person who really wanted to argue with me a long time about automation being exactly the same in Ableton, or insinuating that I don't understand Ableton really well, they said, no, this button is exactly the same as this button over in Bitwig, right? These buttons are exactly the same. They do exactly the same thing. And I'm showing you right now that no, in fact, they don't do exactly the same thing. In Bitwig, I can always trust that this button will show me everything on the track that's automated. It's just hardwired that way. You cannot break that behavior. If you click this button and it's lit up and it says all, it is showing you all the automation on the track. Period. No question. But over here in live, on this track right here, this meat snare track, you saw me get rid of an automation lane. It's still there. The automation is still on this track, but this button is only collapsing and expanding the one that I left pinned. If I want to go find all my automation, I have to right click and do add lane for each automated envelope. If I do that, two things happen that suck. Okay, the first thing that happens is, why am I getting this non-automated track volume lane? That makes no sense at all. It's just clutter, and now it's pinned. It's literally a pinned lane. I can't get rid of it unless I manually get rid of it, right? So that's the first thing that's stupid as hell. It just clutters up my pinned lanes to use this, show me all the stuff that's automated, all right? The next thing is that, see, now it's just showing me what is pinned, not what is automated. So let's get rid of this one again. And let's say, I put down this project for a week because I went on tour. And now I'm coming back and I'm going to start working on this project again. And I'm refamiliarizing myself with the project, and I open up my automation view like this and I start looking around, and the first thing that hits me is I don't trust any of this. I don't know if all of this is correctly pinned open and showing me all of the actual automation in the project. Live will lie to you in this regard. If you are not scrupulous about pinning every new automation lane you make the minute you do it, you can never trust this view, because you can't trust that this is showing you the stuff that is actually automated. Instead, for any track you look at, you go, crap, I don't remember if this is all the automation or not. And you have to right click on this. Well, here, let's make it even worse. Let me touch the volume knob so that it's trying to automate the track volume, or let's touch the pan. So it's trying to automate the pan. You have to say, I don't trust this. So let me right click on this and say add lane, just to make sure. And when I click it, sure enough, it finds a piece of automation that wasn't there because I forgot to pin it or whatever. And worse, it adds this stupid empty lane that doesn't actually have automation in it, that's just cluttering up my view and making this wider than it has to be. And then I have to manually get rid of it. And it's a drag. If you work in project with lots of automation, like many of us do, this is just so freaking tedious. I mean, tedious. And it hurts your eyeballs. And automation is one of the worst things I ever had to do in Ableton. Even though it's great in terms of what you can do, it is not fun to work with because of all this crap. So Bitwig is just, to me, heads and shoulders. Look how clean this is. Look how easy on the eyes this is. Look how easy it is to tell when you're looking at a lane that doesn't actually have any automation versus automation that it does. Notice how you can trust this one button right here to always tell the truth, right? Notice how you can fit more automation on the screen especially if you collapse the tracks to just the clip name itself and not actually showing the waveform in double height. So that's it. I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Just wanted to give you a close look at these two features to better explain why I made the claims I did. That, what was it? Automation was, I had, being able to specify exact value for automation points was pretty high up in my top 12 list. Sidechaining was number 7. The fact that it's so simple and straightforward and you can literally sidechain anything to anything, I consider that a huge workflow boon. And did I talk about automation anywhere else here? I guess I covered it when I talked about this. So my point is, these two features were, to me, very high in the top 12 list of things that I feel strongly make working in Bitwig so much faster and simpler and less painful and less aggravating to your brain and your eyes. And, all of my points like this are all qualitative, quality of life observations. I've worked in Live since version 6. I've done lots and lots of serious heads down production in Live. I know Live very well, thank you. And if I made some assumptions that somebody else who was very familiar with Live would see the benefits, the pros, the pluses of these Bitwig points, if I made an assumption that somebody else would see that very simply and obviously without me having to spend an hour on it like I did for just these two features here in this video, well, I'm sorry about that. But everything I'm talking about, everything I claimed here, I still stand by 100%. And I think these are the things that make working in Bitwig a relative joy compared to working in Ableton. I do not miss any of this crap about Ableton at all. And every time I go back to Ableton to work on something old or to work on a collab or whatever, I just grit my teeth when I run into things like the automation or the sidechaining again. It just drives me nuts because I'm spoiled because Bitwig's so much nicer. So thank you so much for hanging out with me. And if you've sat with me for this long, if you found my previous videos in this series useful, I'm still going to be cranking out a lot more. I go in depth. I try to talk about things from the standpoint of Ableton users, and specifically Bitwig versus Ableton, because they're such similar DAWs. And if you find this useful, if you appreciate me putting out the effort for this kind of stuff, please do me a solid and visit my SoundCloud and my Spotify. Links are right here, and throw me a follow, because I'm at a point in my career where follower count makes a big difference to me. Even every little new follower helps a lot. So check out my music, give me a follow, do me a solid. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.